Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's webinar from Intelligent Relations. I will just get going now and turn on the slideshow. Okay, so firstly, a quick introduction to myself. I'm Rudi Davis, the head of agency here at Intelligent Relations. And for those unfamiliar with what we do at Intelligent Relations, we're a managed service PR provider. And we provide PR to a lot of startups, tech companies throughout North America, Europe, and the rest of the world. And we work with those companies to get them media coverage, build their brand, build their exposure, and build their credibility. For this webinar, I'll be going through some theory and practical advice on how to reset your PR for Q3, Q4, the second half of 2023. A couple of points of order before I kick off with the agenda. So the first one is we're recording the webinar and we'll send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording later on today so you can view that. And secondly, I'll have a Q&A session at the end. So as we go through, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and we'll spend about 10-15 minutes at the end going through those questions. So firstly, here's what we will cover in today's webinar. So I split this into two. So part one is theory, where we'll be going through a little bit of context and then talking through defining your objectives, crafting your key messages, identifying your target audience and defining what success looks like. And then once we've done the theory, we'll go through some practical techniques. So there's the PR toolkit, getting your house in order before doing PR, media and journalist targeting, storytelling and pitching, when and how to use press releases, and building thought leadership. So the first part, theory, I will jump straight into context, current market, and media landscape. Of course, nothing happens in a vacuum, and that is particularly true when it comes to PR. You've got to be very cognizant of the context, the media landscape that you're in when you're going out and doing your media outreach, trying to build engagement with journalists and trying to get media coverage. So there's a few things to be aware of at the moment that has made the landscape in Q3 2023 a little bit different to maybe how it was 12 months ago, certainly different to how it was 18, 24 months ago. So firstly, as I'm sure many of you are aware, if you're with an early stage startup, is the funding environment has got a lot tougher due to the economic situation. So for many startups, getting media coverage, getting that attention has become even more valuable than it was maybe 12 or 18 months ago, just because it's getting a lot harder to find sources of funding, hence why it's kind of more important than it may have been before to make sure you're doing PR successfully, you're being efficient with it, and you're getting as many results from the efforts that you're putting in. And the second bit of context that I think is really important right now as well is that it's not an easy time for the media at the moment. And that's particularly the case with some of the newer media digital outlets that came around 10, 15 years ago. So in the last few months, BuzzFeed has confirmed it's going to shut and fold into Huffington Post. Business Insider is going through rounds of layoffs at the moment. Vice is in trouble, has filed for bankruptcy. There will no doubt be layoffs there as well. But this points a more broader picture within the media landscape at the moment that a lot of titles are struggling. There's going to be restructuring, and unfortunately, there will be job losses as a result of that. And again, it means it makes our job a little bit harder when it comes to just the available pool of journalists that we can go to tell our stories to. And again, that means that we need to ensure that we're being as efficient as we can. We're only going to the right journalists. We're not bothering journalists that sort of aren't relevant to the sort of stories that we're telling, and just sort of being aware and conscious of that context that we're operating in. And then something that never changes regardless of the time of year or the economic cycle that we're in are the challenges that most startups face when they're trying to win media coverage. So I condense those down to these four here. Firstly, there's often a lack of genuinely newsworthy announcements that a typical early stage startup has in any one year. You know, maybe there's a funding round that's going to close. Maybe there's a big partnership that they can announce with a much bigger brand. Maybe there's a new product that's going out. Maybe there's a new C-suite hire that comes with an impressive resume. Outside of those kind of big events, there can often be many months of what you could class as kind of dead air when there isn't really much to go out and announce. So you've got to work harder and think of other techniques you can do, other stories that you can tell to make sure that you keep getting press coverage in between times when you have something big to announce. Another problem that most startups have is low name recognition and social proof. It's a lot harder to pitch to a journalist and get a pickup if they haven't heard of you or your company because you haven't yet got any media coverage, and it creates a bit of that catch-22 situation. Of course, limited resources. A lot of startups are operating on a shoestring, bootstrap kind of approach. They got to make sure that every hour they're putting into this or every dollar they're putting into this is going to get some kind of a return. And then just lack of experience in media relations, the right way to approach journalists, editors, the right way to tell stories. And all of this we'll unpack a little bit during the webinar. Okay, so next section of theory is defining your objectives. It's the first stage you've got to go through because this will underpin and enable you to do the rest of your strategy before you go out and actually start telling your stories to the media. And the typical objectives of a startup when it comes to PR could roughly be boiled down to one or a few of these, and maybe a few outside that are specific to certain companies. But in broad terms, they usually come down to one or more of these. So there's often visibility and brand awareness. You're trying to get your brand, you're trying to increase visibility, clicks, reads in front of your target customers, your target users. Credibility and trust building. Maybe your target users have now heard a little bit about you. You've still got to kind of convince them to come over and for you to get their business. So you want to build your credibility. You want to be seen as trustworthy in front of those people. Investor attraction goes back to what I was talking about at the top of the webinar, particularly in a tight funding environment as we're currently in. That becomes even more important than it was before. Getting seen in the right types of publications that investors are going to be reading makes it a whole lot easier when it comes to building those relationships with potential investors. Talent acquisition. We have been in a very tight labour market, particularly during the COVID peak, and it helps if a company is getting lots of coverage in the types of publications that the talent you're after are reading, such as tech publications. And then there's building a narrative, educating an audience. A little bit more abstract, this one, but it's often when a company needs to sort of raise awareness of a problem that they're solving that perhaps their target users isn't actually at the front of their mind that there's a problem and it can be solved. So that's kind of the more long-term approach to PR that a lot of companies take when they're trying to seed a certain narrative that's then beneficial to them long-term. So once you've defined what your objectives are, you can then sort of work out the next two pieces of your strategy. So number one is what your core messaging should be. And then number two is then where you should be targeting that messaging. So in terms of crafting your key messages, you want to start high level and then you'll sort of refine this as you go along, but a few of the first places to begin to start thinking about what are the key messages you want to get across in the stories that you're telling. Number one, what's the problem you're solving? How can you succinctly articulate that problem and how you're solving it? Next, thinking about your product from the perspective of your target customers. What are their pain points? How are you alleviating their pain points? How well do you understand their pain points? And then what's unique about your product or technology? Are you doing something truly unique? You're using a truly novel technology on the one hand, or on the other hand, it might be you're using an element of AI within your product, which wouldn't be as noteworthy in the current environment versus say you're doing something with federated learning when it comes to medical research, which would probably be on the other end of the spectrum, which would be very noteworthy, very media worthy. So a way to kind of figure out if the thing that you're doing, the technology that you're doing, the product you're building is particularly novel and hasn't had much media coverage. It's just a search on Google for some of those keywords, click onto news and see what's been written about it. If a lot has been written about it, it's saturated. If not much has been written about it, it's kind of virgin territory to go out there and tell some stories about that. So next, identifying your target audience. And again, a few questions and thought processes to go through to really get this down. So, who's your buyer persona? What's the kind of job role that a typical decision maker would make when it comes to using your products? What's their level of seniority? What department are they in? What are the typical kind of job titles that that person would have? Where do they work? Is it enterprise? Is it certain verticals? Is it public sector, private sector? You know, the ways to segment that to kind of figure out where these people work. And again, going back to the previous point, what are the pain points of that particular person, that particular job role, or in that particular vertical? And then lastly, what sort of media outlets does that person consume? There'll probably be a number of media outlets in their particular vertical, maybe a number of media outlets reporting on their particular specialism, and then there's probably going to be more general mainstream media outlets such as business, technology publications that that type of person may read as well. And then defining what success looks like. So you've kind of gone through the process of your key messaging, your target audience. It now comes to be, before you set out, you need to determine what success looks like to then measure the impact of the work that you're doing and the sort of ROI that that's generating. So there's a couple of things to kind of bear in mind here, just to set some expectations and anchor yourself in this activity. So the first one is PR takes time and a lot of patience. So it's not the kind of thing you can turn on, get results, and then turn off again quite quickly. Say with a digital ads campaign or a social media campaign or something like that. You as you get into it, you need to be in it for the medium long haul and understand that it could take a few months from you actually starting this work, doing the outreach, engaging with journalists before you get those first pieces of media coverage out the other side. And that it's the kind of thing that the longer you do it, the more success you're going to have. If you do it and then stop, you can kind of go back to where you started, and it could be hard to then get that momentum again if you're taking that kind of approach. So it needs a consistent, steady amount of work to kind of get results frequently in the media. And then in terms of measuring success, you could set yourself a couple of targets and you could split these between objective and subjective targets. So objectively, you could say, I want 2 pieces, for example, of media coverage after the second month, and then 2 pieces of coverage per month after that on average. And then you could quite accurately measure whether you're hitting that goal, you're above that target, under that target. And then there's the subjective side as well. So as well as just getting quantity, you want to make sure that the results you're getting, it's getting across that narrative and those messaging principles that we spoke about as well. So maybe a subjective target is, I want the media coverage to focus on the problem that we're solving, or I want the media coverage to highlight specifically the technology that we're using. Like whatever some of those key objectives are, you want to have that as one of your targets. You can then go back, review each of those pieces of media that you win, and you can decide how well or not it hit that target, and if you need to course correct a little bit to make sure that you're achieving that. So that was a pretty high level piece on just sort of theory and how to start approaching setting up your strategy. I appreciate it. There's a lot of points we could go into individually, and I gave more of a broad strokes approach. If anyone has any questions on any of that, please drop it into the chat, and then once I get through the slides, we'll spend a bit of time going through those questions and taking a bit of a deep dive. So the second part of the webinar is practical techniques. So taking some of those theories and then think about how we can actually apply those in practice to start getting some media coverage and start being as efficient as we can with the resources we have, and selecting the best types of techniques to get the coverage that's most likely to be impactful. So the first part of this is something that I guess you could call the Startup PR Toolkit. And so this is just kind of building some awareness of the different levers you can pull, the different strings to your bow when it comes to getting media coverage and other types of exposure for your company. The default that we find with a lot of people that are trying to do PR for themselves is a tunnel vision towards press releases. That, press releases is the medium to go out to the media to communicate your message. And while it's effective, and it can be effective in certain contexts, which I'll go through in a moment, it's just one of a number of levers that you can pull to get media coverage. And often it won't be the best thing for you to do, and it would be better spent your time, money doing other things that will be more impactful for your business. So I'll run through these at a high level. And again, any questions you got on any of these specifically, drop them in the chat and I can go through this at the end. So aside from press releases, we've got thought leadership. So this is often in the form of bylines or guest articles that you author yourself. It's published under your own bio, and you can get those published on business media, tech media, specific industry, vertical media. They're a great way to get across a particular narrative that you're trying to build, a particular argument that you're trying to build, raising awareness maybe of a problem. You kind of got free rein to build the narrative that you want to build. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment as to sort of some of the ways to do that. Third, we've got podcast appearances. Often seen as the low-hanging fruit, particularly when it comes to startup PR. There are a lot of podcasts out there, and a lot of podcasts are interested in guests that can prove that they are legitimate experts on the topic that they want to talk about. So kind of as you would pitch yourself to a journalist at a media outlet, it's similar to podcasts. Build a list of podcasts that are relevant to you, maybe tech-focused, industry-focused, and pitch yourself or your boss or the CEO or the founder as to some of the things that they can come onto the show and talk about, and their expertise and why they would make a good guest. We then got article mentions. So often journalists will want to speak to experts on a story that they're writing about to get a unique perspective and a first person voice to sort of build out the narrative. And that's, again, a very good way to get into either industry media, tech media, business media, wherever your expertise could be relevant. Next, we've got conference speaking. Again, a very useful tool for a lot of founders, CEOs, and other people senior in startups to build their exposure, build their network, get some experience behind public speaking. And the way this is done is to build the list of conferences that are going to be relevant to you. Many of those conferences will invite people to submit applications to become speakers, whereas others, it's more of a cold email to the event organizers and starting a conversation to see if there's any availability, and you offering yourself and suggesting what you could speak about based on your expertise. Then we've got award wins. There is often a lot of media publications will have a subsection of their brand that is an award-giving body. So things like the Inc. 5000, other top-tier business publications run awards at different parts of the year. Things like Forbes, 30 under 30, 40 under 40. And then there's the more niche industry media that just have awards based on their specific industry. Can be a very good way for startups to get some exposure and get some media coverage and high profile news publications. And you want to be looking for the types of awards where the subcategories are very relevant to the technology you're doing, the industry you're in, or that are specifically kind of geared towards startups to stand the best chance of winning those awards. And the last few ones, just to go through high level, so product reviews. This is particularly, or can be particularly fruitful if you're more B2C, you've got a consumer product, and it's the type of thing that just naturally generates a lot of reviews online. You want to be pitching it to the people who have reviewed those products in the past. When it comes to B2B, sometimes there's sort of an ecosystem of reviews, sometimes there isn't. So just sort of check that first, do some research, and if there is, it'll be worth you doing that. And then the last couple, analyst reviews. If your company is at a size and a scale where you're ready to be talking to analysts at places like Gartner, Deloitte, Forrester's, and the analysts research the industry and the vertical that you're in, those sites kind of welcome applications to set up calls with analysts to learn more about your business. That's not so much a play for a very early stage startup. It needs to be a startup that's got a post revenue, got a bit of a track record of success behind them before you get into that. But once you get to that scale, it's something you can start looking into. And then lastly, CEO founder profiles. This really helps if the CEO founder has a particularly unique backstory. Some of the founders that we've worked with in the past, we've leveraged backstories, including somebody that was a fighter pilot that then founded an airline that then went into something else, and we spoke about how that kind of informed his discipline to business. Someone else that ran a llama farm and how that taught him to be more empathetic when it came to business. We've had people with really inspiring refugee stories that have moved from countries to another country as a child, started again, and built themselves up from nothing, which are always very inspiring stories. And many other stories where the CEO or the founder has a really unique, interesting or inspiring backstory, and it's the kind of places that business publications like Forbes or Inc. or Fast Company are often interested in to kind of inspire and offer insight to their readers. So there's a little bit about the options available to you, and I'll run into a bit more detail on some of those in some of the slides coming up. But before we get into that, something else that's really important to do before you start investing your time and money in PR and media outreach is getting your house in order before you start. So there's a bit of a grid and a checklist that we like to go through with the startups that we work with, roughly split website, social media, branding. So when it comes to the website, small things, if you type in your brand name into Google, are you one of the first results to show up, or are you not even on the first page? You want to at least be on the first page, that if a journalist does a cursory search, they can kind of see that you're legit, you're established, and that you're actually showing up on Google. Is your website complete? It's free of errors. There's not 404 pages. There's not Latin filler text anywhere. The site is updated, has an About Us page. Gives a good blurb about your company, its mission, its vision, and most importantly, you've got a team page. You've got the leadership on that page. You've got bios of each of the members of the leadership, so people can see who is behind the company. And does the design stand up to the competition? It's a nicely produced website, and there's a clear design throughout, and it looks like a professional company that's ready to go out there and start talking to the media. Then we got social media. So you just want to make sure that all of your profiles are up to date. Your team's profiles are up to date, particularly the leadership team. It can help as well to publish some articles on LinkedIn or some kind of thought leadership content on LinkedIn, just to show some of your thoughts, opinions, arguments, insights on the industry. And also that your Crunchbase profile is up to date, shows the number of employees you've got, what the last funding round was, etc. So anyone that does a bit of due diligence on you can kind of see the current state of the company. And then lastly, branding. You want to make sure that you've sort of formalized the brand. It clearly states what you do. It states the problem that you're solving, who your customer is. It's reflected across all of your channels. You have a media kit if it's requested, and that you've done your thinking, and the brand is coherent, and it's kind of clear what you do, your value proposition, the problem you're solving, from just clicking through the homepage or the about page. So that's a little bit about kind of getting started. The next thing you'd want to do is building your lists of targeting for media, journalists, editors. You got to know who you're targeting before you then go out and start pitching to them. So there is a few ways to kind of look at this and start segmenting it. If you just went out there and started looking for random journalists, it's like trying to boil the ocean. You need to break this down and conceptualize this in ways that makes it manageable and makes it logical. So one of the ways that we think about this and split this internally is, on the one hand, you've got top tier media, and you could subdivide that into things like general consumer publications like The Guardian, BBC, New York Times. You've got places that are more sort of top tier tech focused, Bloomberg, Business Insider, Forbes. And then you've got kind of top tier that are very tech focused, places like TechCrunch, VentureBeat, The Verge. That's on kind of one side of the table. And Of course, everybody wants to get into those kind of publications, but with an early stage startup that may not yet have any media exposure behind them, that's something you've got to work up to and put as an ambition. But before you get to that kind of caliber of media, you want to focus more on the other side, which is the industry media, the media that just reports on the particular vertical that you're in. And no matter the vertical, no matter how obscure it is, there'd at least be a couple of publications that report on it. And if it's a particularly big vertical, say financial services, insurance, supply chain, human resources, like some of these examples here, you'd expect maybe a dozen, 15, or maybe up to 20 different publications that just report specifically on that industry. And that's the low-hanging fruit when it comes to startups, early stage startups, companies that haven't had that much media coverage in the past. You wanna pick off the easier publications first, build those relationships, get some coverage in there, get that visibility to then create the stepping stones to the bigger types of win that you can target as an ambition later down the line. And just to conceptualize that a little more, and using ourselves as an example, we like to think of it when we're building out the list of industries that might be relevant for a client. We think of, well, what is the industry that the company is in? And what is the industries that the company's clients are in? So in this case, the example is our own business, intelligent relations. So our industry is squarely PR, then it's marketing and advertising, and then, a little bit, it's also SEO, but we quite firmly fit into each of those categories. And then we've got the industries that our clients are in, and our clients are across a lot of industries. So this is just an example of some of the industries that we could include here. So tech, financial services, cybersecurity, healthcare, data analytics, robotics, IoT. And what we'd want to do is we'd want to get sort of in PR industry specific stories into the PR, marketing, advertising, SEO type publications where we want to put stories that talk to our industry peers. And then in our clients' industry media, we'd want to put out stories that talk more about how companies in X industry can win media coverage, can do PR, how to approach PR, those kind of stories that would be more educational and informative to people trying to do the thing that we're providing the solution to. And a good piece of advice here is once you've defined your industry or small categories of industries, and then the main industries that your clients are in, then research the main publications in each of those industries. And you should be able to find anywhere from maybe 6 to 15 publications in each of those industries. And then you can kind of see at a glance, okay, here's the likely publications that I could get into with a bit of work over a certain amount of time. The next part is storytelling and pitching. And there's a couple of important things to unpack here, just to kind of approach this with the right mindset. So one is a journalist's job is to tell stories and not to promote products. So you always need to be pitching them stories and not just the thing that your product does. And then secondly, to paraphrase somewhat, ask not what a journalist can do for you, but ask what you can do for a journalist. A journalist, same as the previous point, they're not there to just sell and promote your products. You've got to help them. And the emphasis is on you to help them rather than them helping you. And once you sort of get into that mindset, that's a lot more healthy, productive, and sustainable way to do media outreach and treat journalists well. So when it comes to, so how can I kind of build stories that kind of just go beyond, my product or my company to then start sending these types of pitches to media outlets? There's a few kind of off the shelf ways you can start doing this, or that you can start maybe applying a little bit and changing a little bit to your specific circumstances. So one of the first things to think about is, does the founder or the CEO or anyone else in the C-suite have a particularly unique, interesting, or inspiring backstory? If there is, that is a story in itself that could be told and could be of interest to an audience. Are you pioneering very novel technologies? you could then put out stories that just focus more on how this technology is solving a certain problem or solving a certain thing in an industry, rather than explicitly making it about yourself. It's about the technology and the problem it's solving, and you're the person with the technology, so you naturally become part of that story. Are you applying novel technologies? Sorry, are you applying technologies to novel use cases? So maybe it's not a new novel technology you're using, it's been around for a while, but maybe you're the first person to lift that technology and then put it into a completely new use case or a completely new vertical. And then that in itself becomes of interest to the media that report on that particular industry. Next, are you addressing a known problem in the industry? And I imagine this is something that would apply to many of you on the call. What are the stories that you can tell about that problem? What are new ways that you can come at that problem? What's the new way that you're solving that problem? That's ways to kind of tell stories when it comes to that angle. Do you have some interesting or unusual success stories? What have users achieved using your products? What kind of businesses have users achieved using your products? Just kind of understanding how some of your users are using the product, and any particular interesting, unusual, unique success stories, again, can become the story, and you naturally then form part of that story as the company providing that product. And then lastly, do you have some novel or unique use cases? Is your product being used in ways that you didn't anticipate being used in a particularly unusual, inventive use case, which can then become the story as well? This is just some kind of initial ideas and ways to start thinking about it. There's many other ways that you can build stories around your product or your users or how it's being used, but this is a good way to just get that thought process going as to what are some of the stories I can build. It isn't just me pitching what my product does. And then the next section is on press releases. So when and how to use press releases, I just want to go a little bit more into the weeds on this, is it's important to get across a couple of points, as we often find that this is like a bit of an error that when some clients come into us with the work they were doing before working with us. So when it comes to press releases, a golden rule, if you like, is to never send out a press release just for the sake of sending out a press release. And so by that, we mean there are some times where sending a press release out, it's probably worth it because you're announcing something that's newsworthy to someone, and then it's likely it's going to get picked up. There are other times where we find there's a tendency with some people that they feel they should just put out a press release every month or at a set time, whenever that is, just because they feel that's the way to communicate to the media. And then that can then lead to a lot of press releases going out. They're a little bit thin, aren't too newsworthy, don't get pick up, and then that time and money could have been better spent on something else. So a few times you'd want to use a press release as a startup is a launch announcement, just to kind of anchor yourself, say that you're there. And the next one is a major funding announcement. If you've closed Series A, Series B, etc., that's going to be most likely at least interesting to the particular media that report on your vertical. If it's a particularly big funding announcement, it may be of interest to bigger publications like TechCrunch and those kind of places. A major partnership, particularly if you've secured a partnership with a household name, a blue chip company, a multinational, kind of leveraging the much bigger brand recognition of that partner to then get some media coverage. New product release, if it's a genuinely new product that you just put out, can be worth putting out a press release. And then a major award win that's perhaps from a very legitimate, recognized body could be of interest as well. We've sent to the right places and people. On the other side, you want to stay clear of press releases for anything that's kind of you promoting something, promoting a discount, promoting an offer. A press release is not the medium to do that. A minor product update that perhaps you're trying to dress up as being more than that. If it's the same old product, just a few new features, it's probably not worth putting out a press release. A small event that you're hosting, again, not really the medium to communicate that. Any thin research findings that you've published, are most likely not going to get picked up, and winning an unrecognized award or maybe an award that you paid for, again, is not the best medium for communicating that message. Many other times that you wouldn't want to send a press release, so it's maybe a little bit easier to think, here are the key reasons I would want to send a press release. If it falls outside of that, then you want to go back to that grid of options you've got and think, instead of spending that time writing the press release, sending it out, or paying for a press release distribution platform, my time and money would be better spent maybe trying to pitch to get an appearance on a podcast or applying for an award. The other thing with press releases is you also need to, in the release, not just explain the thing that you're announcing, you also need to explain like why it's newsworthy, why it's interesting. So some of the ways that we do that with our clients is, does it solve a problem? Does it address a need? Does it progress towards a goal? Does it achieve a goal? Does it provide you insight? Is there a wider industry context? Is there a labor shortage in the industry? Your product helps to solve that shortage. Is there a particular known problem in the industry that's never been solved that you're helping to solve? Like putting it into a broader industry context that readers, journalists are aware of also just kind of helps to build out that story beyond just the thing that you're announcing. And then you've written your press release. How do you get it out there? How do you get some pickups, some republications? There's two broad ways to do this. One is a distribution service like Cision or PR Newswire, where you pay a set amount of money and it will then distribute and syndicate it on a number of publications that are within that distribution's network. It's a good way to get a large number of pickups, and those pickups are guaranteed. The downside of that is they're often hidden on the back pages of these websites, so not many people are going to stumble across them. And also they're often in publications that may not be that relevant to your target audience and the people that you're trying to get in front of. So the people that do read them may not be at all applicable to the people you're trying to get in front of. The other option is direct sending. You'll get less pickup, but you'll often get it picked up in publications that are a lot more relevant to you. And this is going back to thinking about what is my industry, what are my clients' industries. You know, once you've built your list of publications, then you will know, if I'm a supply chain company, I want to put this announcement out to these dozen supply chain publications. You can send it direct to the editors at each of those publications. And if it's an interesting enough story and it's noteworthy enough, you would stand a good chance of getting picked up in some of those publications, and it can be very relevant to you. And then the last bit to go through, just touching a little bit on building thought leadership. So I'm sort of focusing on press releases, thought leadership, because it's two things that a lot of startups, when they're trying to do PR, will initially do. So yeah, press releases is one option. The second one, thought leadership or bylines or submitting guest articles. It's a good way to get into kind of top tier publications at places like Forbes, TechCrunch, The Next Web, The Verge. There's a lot of kind of top tier tech business, as well as a lot of vertical media publications that will invite you to submit either pitches or written articles for them to consider for publication in their outlets. So it's a great way to get into these publications. It's a good way to build CEO or other types of thought leadership. And as I said earlier, it's a good way to kind of build a certain narrative that you're trying to get across. The sort of one golden rule with guest posting, with bylines, is they cannot be explicitly promotional. It can't just be a product pitch or a press release about your product or what you're doing. But while you can't promote your products, you should think of it in terms of, well, by doing this, I can build my social proof. I'm getting featured in these very credible publications. As I said, it develops your thought leadership. You can come to be seen as an expert or a thought leader on the problem or the narrative that you're talking about. You can get a lot of backlinks doing this, which has all the extra benefits to your SEO. And then it builds that narrative that's beneficial to your business. It builds an argument for why somebody might want to use the type of product that you're doing, or that why the current way we're solving the problem that you're solving is rubbish, and it'd be much better to use the type of product that you use to solve that problem, or many other narratives that people want to achieve with this type of activity. So just to very high level way to start thinking about this. So one is research the media landscape. And if you've done that in the first step of here are my industry publications, here are my clients' industry publications, you'll have an idea of the types of publications out there. Have a read through those publications, see the types of guest articles that are getting published, the types of things that people are talking about, develop a pitch, and then send that pitch out to the editors of those publications. And if it's a good enough story targeted at the right audience, you'll stand a good chance of getting 1 or 2 pickups when you do that outreach. So that, in very broad terms, is just a few ways to start thinking about recalibrating and kickstarting your PR for the rest of 2023. So thanks for listening to that. As I said, we'll send out an email with a recording to that so you can catch anything that you didn't get the first time around. And I will spend the rest of the webinar going through the questions. Just let me open up the document. And yeah, if anyone has another chance to ask a question, drop this in the chat now and I will get to that at the end. Okay, so first question is from Cesar. How many journalists do you typically need to email before getting a positive reply? It's a bit of a how long is a piece of string kind of question. But I guess to contextualize that, it depends on, I guess the best way to look at that is what is the type of thing you're trying to achieve to begin with. If you're putting out a press release and you're sending that out to 12, 15 editors at industry publications that report on your industry, if it's an interesting enough newsworthy announcement, I would expect success to be something like maybe 2 to 4 publications of that into a story across different industry publications. If you're pitching thought leadership, byline ideas, and it's a good story targeted at the right audience, if you put it out to 10, 12 editors of publications, then I'd say success could be getting 1 interest to pick up. If you're doing more kind of speculative, offering a story idea or yourself as an expert source, it's going to be kind of higher numbers, at least to begin with, if you don't have any media footprint. And it could be something like 30, 40, 50 goes contacting journalists as you're figuring it out and calibrating your own strategy before you get a positive reply. The next question is from Felipe. How can I take advantage of media coverage that my competitors are winning? That's a good point, and is a good thing to add to any kind of PR strategy that you're doing yourself. At the least, set up Google News alerts daily or weekly for each of your competitors' brand names, so you can just see in a roundup the kind of media coverage that your competitors are getting. Once you start getting familiar with the coverage that they're getting, you can start to understand A, the types of stories that they're putting out, and B, the types of publications and the specific journalists that are publishing those stories. So you'll then know that those journalists, those publications are warm to those kind of stories. You should add those to your target lists of people to go out to and pitch to. And you'll also get a feel for the kind of stories that are of interest within your industry, and you can use that as inspiration to come up with your own stories and your own pitches. Next question is from Camilla. Do you think it is worth paying for coverage? Broadly speaking, PR it's organic media. It's media that you win through the strength of your pitch, the strength of your relationship with journalists. So generally speaking, no, like a pay to play will either be flagged as sponsored content, sponsored article, or it'll be in a publication that's maybe a little less reputable than the types of publications that you could get into organically. So always view this as an organic exercise where the fact you get published is down to how good your pitch is and how strong your relationships are. The next question from Laura, is there an optimum amount of times to pitch to the media each month? Again, it kind of depends on what it is you're doing in any particular month. A good way to think about that is thinking of all the tools available to you, press releases, bylines, award submissions, conference speaking, like CEO profiles. you could, or you should, to be most efficient at the start of the month, or even more high level every quarter, kind of map out the techniques, the tactics you want to do that month based on some external factors. Are there some submission deadlines for awards in a particular month? Are there conferences coming up that month? Do you know you're going to have an announcement in a certain month? Arrange it based on your business dates, other things happening in the industry, and then you can start to see the sort of things that make the most sense to do each month. And then from that, you can see how many people you should be emailing to try and secure those things. Okay, next question, Michelle. What are some of the best ways to build relationships with journalists? It really comes back to some of the points in the webinar. So one is pitch them stories, don't pitch them your products. And the second is always see it as like, well, what can you do for them? What's the value that you can provide to journalists rather than what they can do for you? And that can often be that you're just engaging with journalists on their social profiles on Twitter. You're providing kind of insights, constructive comments on the articles that they're publishing. You're reaching out to them not to necessarily make any specific ask, but maybe to share a follow-up you thought was interesting about one of their articles, to share a personal experience or some data or something you've got that either supports or creates a second opinion on something that they've reported about. But just kind of ways to engage them and think about ways to contact them and communicate them on their different channels that, to begin with at least, isn't just you making a hard ask for them to write a certain story or publish a press release. Yeah, lastly, Andrea, realistically, how much time do I need to spend a week on PR to be effective? Good question. And again, it does depend. With good tools, and I'll go into that in a moment, with like a strategy that you plan in advance at the start of the month or each quarter, so you know what you're going to be doing and you don't have to waste time every week coming up with new ideas. Perhaps something like 5 to 10 hours a week as you get going, if you're doing it yourself solo, might be the sort of time investment you want to make to begin with. And then you can start sort of calibrating that as you get going, as you put new types of cycles, as you build kind of relationships, and that'll then change over time. Okay, yeah, that's all the questions, and thanks everyone for asking those questions. And yeah, any other questions that anyone didn't get a chance to answer, by all means, drop me an email. My address is here, is rudy@intelligentrelations.com. And just before we wrap, I just want to kind of mention the product that we're providing on Intelligent Relations, what I mentioned at the top of the call. So we have a managed service product where we're combining our own proprietary AI-powered PR platform, which is then managed by our in-house PR professionals. So we've created a product that combines the best of both worlds of experienced PR pros and technology that can highlight and quickly identify the best journalists and the best pictures to send to those journalists. We're offering that as a combined product at the moment, and it's been tailored specifically to startups, early stage companies that want to start getting their initial coverage or want to start building on some coverage that they've already built to get more exposure, get more credibility, get more of a footprint. That starts from $2,500 a month, and I'll be sending out more details in the follow-up email in terms of how to book a demo or any other information that you might want on that. And that's everything from me for this month's webinar. Thanks a lot, everyone, for turning up, and look out for an email from us shortly as well in terms of the next webinars we'll be doing in July and onwards.